Hello and welcome to this video. Larry Coryell often gets called the godfather of jazz rock or the godfather of fusion. His importance in the development of the genre that we talk about on this channel so much cannot be overestimated. This is one of the most important musicians to lay the groundwork of this style of music. And yet he never gets mentioned in the same breath as a John McLaughlin or Herbie Hancock or a Joe Zawinul. This is not because the albums aren't good. He produced in the 1970s some of the greatest jazz fusion albums ever made. And on this video, I'm going to be ranking all of those albums, right? But before we do that, I want to give you a little bit of a background to who Larry Coryell was. As jazz entered the 1960s, we could see also at the same time the development of popular music and rock music. Bands like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles changed the landscape of contemporary music, placing the guitar at the centre of popular music. Jazz reacted to this with the emergence of the great guitarist of the 60s in the jazz world, which is Wes Montgomery. But Wes Montgomery came to success pretty late, but he was actually from the same generation as the beboppers. In the early 60s, three guitarists emerged on the scene that all knew each other. One was George Benson, one was Pat Martino, and one was Larry Coryell. If you check out the interview that Rick Beato's done with George Benson, it's an incredible interview, and he mentions this, and he mentions the importance of the guitar at that time. The guitar was suddenly centre stage. Now, George Benson and Pat Martino, both virtuoso guitarists, their background was much more in the established language of jazz guitar. Larry Coryell came onto the scene understanding that language inside out, but with also a much wider set of influences. He was drawing on rock guitar, he was drawing on country guitar, folk guitar, a whole bunch of different styles. He was able to bring in elements from guitarists like Scotty Moore, played for Elvis Presley, or people like Cliff Gallup. He was bringing those into music, and he was spotted by forward-thinking musicians in the early to mid-60s, most notably Chico Hamilton. And on the albums with Chico Hamilton that he recorded around 65, 66, you could hear a completely different approach to electric guitar playing. He then forms a band in 1966 called the Free Spirits, which is one of the first jazz rock fusion bands. And off the success of that, he's offered a record deal, recording his first album in 1968, which is called Lady Coryell. I'm going to be ranking the albums from the period 1968 to 1978. Larry Coryell made a lot of albums, and if I was to include the albums post 1978, we're talking about a lot of albums. And for me, this would obscure his importance in the sort of classic era of jazz rock fusion. There are some incredible albums on this list, and if you're a jazz rock fan, you need to check it out, and hopefully this will give you an idea of how to traverse this incredible discography, which has not been discussed that much. I'm pretty sure this video has not get the views it deserves, because Larry Coryell does not get his dues. And I'm going to try, once I've gone through the ranking, to explain why I think this is. It's very interesting. I didn't know all these albums. This has taken a lot of research. I knew about half the albums on this list. I've had to go and listen to all the other albums and place them into a context. And I've been really surprised of some of the hidden gems and some of the pioneering stuff that Larry did that I didn't know about. So there's 20 albums on this list, so there's a lot to get going through. I won't spend hours on each album like I normally do. So I'm going to try and go quite quick. So the right at the bottom is an album called The Real Great Escape, which came out on Vanguard in 1973. It features his incredible early group that features Harry Wilkinson on drums, the great Mike Mandel on keyboards, who was a real innovator on the use of synthesizers in jazz rock fusion. We've got Mervyn Bronson on bass, and the incredible Steve Marcus on saxophone, another underrated saxophone player. one of my favourite saxophone players who was also very important in the development of jazz rock fusion. Now, this album isn't that great. Larry Coryell, bringing in elements from popular music, wanted to create songs, he wanted to create psychedelia, he wanted to explore what the rock bands were exploring, and he was doing it in his own way, different to the way John McLaughlin did it, different to the Weather Report and Herbie Hancock. He had his own approach. And he's very brave on this album, but it does feature a lot of him singing. And his vocals are okay, they're not terrible. But this is a bit of a patchy album and it's confused. I don't think he quite knew what he was trying to achieve with this album. I would say on this list, this is the only mediocre album on this list. I'm not a fan of this. There's still some great guitar playing, but even his guitar playing is a bit wild and all over the place. Larry Coryell is a virtuoso guitarist. I don't think he gets the credit he should. Some of the guitar solos on here are as fast and blinding as John McLaughlin. In some cases, before even John McLaughlin was playing in that style. And there's moments in the early 70s where he's sweeping across the neck like Frank Gambale. It's completely ahead of its time. His phrasing is immaculate. He's always full of incredible ideas, but he has inherited that wildness of Jimi Hendrix, and often he will push himself to the point where he falls over himself. I personally love that, but if you're after neat, precise like Larry Carlton-esque guitar playing, that's not Larry Coryell. There's something else. There's some interesting stuff on this album. So that's what I've got at number 20. Right, so at number 19, this is a good album. From now on, they're good to great to absolute masterpieces. At number 19, I've got The Lion and the Ram. This is an acoustic guitar album. He's done a lot of exploration in the 70s into acoustic guitar playing, and some of this is quite revolutionary. This album features a band. We've got Joe Beck, another great guitar player, and he's also playing keyboards, bass on here. We've got Mike Mandel is playing piano and bass synthesizer. We've got Danny Tone on guitar, and the great Michael Urbaniak. Oh God, Urbaniak, who is a great jazz fusion violin player. He's also on this album. He plays on the track Line and the Ram. This is a good album. It's interesting. I don't think it's really that successful, but it's interesting to see Larry Coryell exploring the acoustic guitar in a jazz fusion setting. I think the inclusion of a band on here doesn't quite work, and that's what knocks this one down. It came out on Arista in 1976. All right. At number 18, I've got a live album called Fairyland that came out on Mega Records, right, in 1971. And it features a trio, a power trio, which is quite interesting. It's Larry Coryell, of course, on guitar and vocals. We've got Chuck Rainey on bass and Bernard Purdie on drums. So he's got the great sort of rhythm and blues pop rhythm section of all time. This was recorded live at Montreux Jazz Festival. It's a really good album. It's Larry Coryell's got a really interesting take on the sort of power trio, and there's an album here which I think is far better that was recorded around about the same time. This is okay. It's just brought down by the quality of the recording. I don't know what Mega Records is, but the quality is not great. It's a bit, almost sounds like a bootleg. Right. At number 17, I've got an album really low on the list that's going to upset people who know what I'm into. I have got on at 17 Spaces, which came out on Vanguard in 1970. Now, this album is a monumental album in the history of jazz rock fusion because it pits Larry Coryell against a newly arrived in New York John McLaughlin. Right, it's also got Billy Cobham on drums, and I think it's Chick Corea on keyboards. I don't know the rest to be off the top of my head. I have never liked this album. I am the biggest John McLaughlin fan in the world, right? But I've never liked this album. It's supposed to be this great jazz fusion guitar album, but actually, it's much more traditional than you would think. It's a lot of it is just swinging jazz. It takes its inspiration really from the sort of French jazz guitarists like Django Reinhardt and especially René Thomas. So there's a tribute to René Thomas, which I think is my favourite track on the album. It's a really good album. It's very interesting. I think when John McLaughlin arrived on the scene, he took away the spotlight from Larry Coryell. And Larry Coryell bringing him in on this album, it's one of those albums that sort of launches John McLaughlin onto the scene, along with In a Silent Way, Bitches Brew, Jack Johnson, and then Tony Williams' Lifetime stuff. Neither of them are playing particularly great. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not what you would expect. It's not the great jazz rock fusion album. It's quite a nice, polite jazz album with two great jazz guitarists. Throughout it, John McLaughlin sounds like he's a little bit out of tune as well. I don't know if it's my ears. I don't know what it is, but it just never sounds quite in tune. And I've never really liked this album. And so I know there's people who absolutely love it, and there's many people that would put this at the top of the list. But I think it's because John McLaughlin's on it, and it takes away from the incredible innovations of Larry Coryell. At number 16, I have his first album, which is called Lady Coryell. Again, it came out on Vanguard in 1969. It was recorded in 1968, 69. Larry Coryell, on his first album, is playing everything: guitar, bass, and he's singing on it. And then the drums is being played by Bob Moses, the great Bob Moses from the Gary Burton Band, a band that Larry Coryell also played in the 1960s. Now, this is an important point. There's really two schools of jazz rock fusion to start off with. To start off with, we have the Gary Burton school, which is exploring a sort of ethereal approach to the sort of harmony that Gary Burton heard in the Beatles, twisting interesting chords, and also pulling on sort of Americana and sort of, Midwestern aesthetic. This is then carried on by Pat Metheny in the 70s and becomes one of the great styles of jazz rock fusion. Before then, of course, it's all Mahavishnu Orchestra and it's all coming out of John McLaughlin. Larry Coryell actually pulls on both of those sort of traditions and pulls them together, but doesn't get the credit for this. On his first album, he's doing all of that and he's trying to do too much. It's a bit varied and all over the place. The best stuff is the stuff that he did with Jimmy Garrison and Elvin Jones. Yes, on Larry Coryell's first album, he has John Coltrane's rhythm section. They only appear on one track, and I think Elvin Jones appears on another track. This is a patchy album. It's very interesting. A lot of early jazz rock albums are patchy. They're trying to work out how to do it, and that's what you feel on this. They're not too sure what they're supposed to be doing, but a very good album, a very interesting album. At number 15, I have Aspects. Aspects is one of the later albums by the 11th House. In 1973, after hearing the Mahavishnu Orchestra, Larry Coryell decided to pull together a band that would also explore those ideas called the 11th House. It's one of the great bands of the jazz rock era. Again, it's eclipsed by Weather Report and Return to Forever and the Mahavishnu Orchestra. But the first albums are absolutely incredible. This one, Aspects, which came out on Arista in 1976, is undone a little bit by the funk. It sounds like a Brecker Brothers album. The lineup is Larry Coryell, of course, on guitar. We've got Teremasi Hino on trumpet. Of course, his partner in crime, Mike Mandel, on keyboards. And we've got John Lee on bass and Jerry Brown on drums. That rhythm section's pretty incredible. And on the opening track, there's some furious fusion. Some of Larry Coryell's best stuff, and I wish I could remember the name of the track. It's the opener on the album. He's backed up on here by a whole ton of guests, including Randy Brecker, David Sanborn, Michael Brecker, Steve Carmont on acoustic guitar, and James Ntoumi on percussion. And the inclusion of the Brecker brothers take it down a certain avenue. As a funky fusion album, it's a really good album, but it doesn't do what the 11th House does. It's not a bad album, but it's not one of his best. And we are now going to move on to number 14, which is Basics, an album that I wasn't aware of, that came out on Vanguard in 1976 with a lovely psychedelic cover. This is actually a collection of Larry Coryell's early explorations that were unreleased from the late 60s, from 1968 to 69. There's a variety of musicians on it. I feel this is stronger than Lady Coryell. There's a lot more interesting stuff on here, and for somebody who wants to hear successful explorations into early jazz rock, Basics by Larry Coryell is a good album to get, and I would get that over Lady Coryell. Okay. At number 13, I have Back Together Again, which is an album he made in collaboration with Alphonse Mouzon. This is a good, fiery jazz rock album. Alphonse Mouzon was an incredible drummer that I first came across with his incredible drumming on the album Sahara by McCoy Tyner. This guy could play like Elvin Jones, but he could also play with the ferocity equivalent to Billy Cobham. And he was the original drummer in the 11th House. So um, Atlantic Records bring back these two people for this album. Having Atlantic Records behind it, the production is absolutely fantastic. There's some incredible stuff on it. There's some very strange, weird stuff on this album as well. And it gets a little bit undone by wanting to be funky and trying to have a crossover hit. It also sports. Atlantic Records at this point would often bring out some of the most bizarre album covers in history, and this is a bizarre album cover. Anybody from the UK who remembers in the early 80s the advert for Kinder Surprise, you know, that horrible egg thing that went chuck-a-doobie, right? I can't look at this cover without thinking of that. I won't go into the cover because I've talked about this cover on another video. So, shall we move on? It's a good album. There's some incredible playing, and it benefits from the production. Right, number 12, I've got Two for the Road with Steve Kahn. Right, this is a live album recorded with the great Steve Kahn. They take up on some jazz standards. Now, Larry Coryell was really brilliant on taking on the idea of solo guitar or duo guitar, and this is going to become very successful with the guitar trio of John McLaughlin, Al Di Meola, and Paco de Lucia. I feel that Larry Coryell was exploring that area before that, and he's doing it on this album. This is a really, really good album. It's not the best if you want to hear his sort of solo guitar or duo guitar stuff, but it's a good album. They play fantastic on there. It's well recorded. Nice album. Right. At the number 11, I've got Twin House. Now, this is another acoustic duo album with the great Philip Catherine. Philip Catherine is the guitarist that emerged in the early 70s. He ends up replacing Jan Ackerman in Focus. That's probably what he's most well known for. But Philip Catherine is coming out of that sort of Django Reinhardt European school of jazz guitar, and he plays that very well. And that is also it's one of the elements in Larry Coryell's playing. They suit each other more, I think, than the stuff he's doing with Steve Kahn. But it's great stuff. It's a good album that came out on Elektra Records in 1977. Right. Okay, now we're into the top 10. At number 10, I have his second album that came out in 1969 called Coryell. This sports another horrendous cover, which is him in a sort of rustic setting with his family in the nude. Right, it's very strange. And then the album opens up with a track, I think it's called Sex. It's very strange, you know. Larry Coryell does have a penchant for, sexual titles. There's a credible track on the album Offering called Foreplay, but we'll get to that in a minute. I've always avoided this album because of the cover, and I thought it would be just more of the stuff that's on Lady Coryell. So I hadn't listened to this album. I put it on. For 1969, this is some of the most ferocious guitar-based jazz rock fusion I have ever heard. His guitar tone is incredible. It's ferocious and fiery. It is undone by a bit of his singing now and then, but we start to see the inclusion of his early 70s group. It's got Bernard Purdie on drums, Ron Carter on bass, Jim Pepper on flute and saxophone. Jim Pepper, don't know much about him, but he made a jazz rock album which is influenced by Native American music. Larry Coryell plays on that. It's absolutely appalling. I've never heard albums so bad. I hadn't heard it till I did the research for this. Anyway, we got Chuck Rainey on guitar and bass guitar, and Mike Mandel on keyboards, and we've got the late, great Albert Stinson. Albert Stinson was a bass player that emerged with Larry Coryell and died at the age of 24. He's now long forgotten, so I'm very pleased to be able to shout his name. So wherever he is, we're thinking of you, Albert Stinson. So This is a really interesting album for 1969. It's beyond Jack Johnson. It's beyond. It's like almost in the same territory as Tony Williams' Lifetime. I loved it. Some of the playing is incredible. The top 10 now is all incredible albums, right? Above that, I've got Planet End, which came out in 1975, but wasn't recorded in 1975. It pulls together some outtakes from Spaces and also from the first 11th House album called Introducing the 11th House. Now, Introducing the 11th House is a classic jazz rock album and is very high on this list. And the tracks here are equal to that. I like the mix on this album, and it's fiery. I think the stuff that got on Introducing the 11th House was a little bit more concise. What we have with the 11th House tracks here is really fiery playing, and Mike Mandel is off the scale on synth. It's incredible playing. But we also have some outtakes from Spaces with John McLaughlin on guitar. These are better. For my personal taste, I think this is better, more interesting than the stuff that ended up on Spaces. And I think the reason for that is because at the time, this stuff, which is more jazz rocky, is more out there, is more avant-garde, probably seemed less commercial and so wasn't put on. And then with the success of John McLaughlin, they decided to try and get this stuff out and recoup a bit of costs, But Planet End is a fantastic album. Right. At number 8, I have At Montreux with the 11th House, which is a live album that came out on Vanguard in 1976. This is a fantastic album. And it's great to hear the 11th House unleashed. The thing I love about jazz rock is when it's fiery and out there. I've done a whole top 20 on burning jazz rock albums, jazz rock tracks where they really let loose. So that's what I want to hear. And the 11th House really do on this album. It's absolutely incredible. When I heard it on vinyl as a kid, I didn't think much to the mix, but going back to it now and hearing it and listening to it on YouTube, it's a much clearer than I remember, which is probably why I've got it quite low on the list. It does what 11th House does. If you're going to buy an 11th House album, you're going to buy the first or the second album, but this is incredible as well. So we have that at number 7, right? At number 6, I have The Restful Mind that came out in 1975. This is a groundbreaking album for Larry Coryell. It's recorded on acoustic guitar, and he's working with the group Oregon, which includes Ralph Towner on acoustic guitar as well. Paul McCandless and Colin Walcott are also in there. And they're bringing in that sort of Americana influence that Oregon were brilliant at. I haven't spoken about Oregon enough on this channel, and I'll tell you why. I absolutely love them, but I don't know the whole catalogue, right? And that's why I haven't talked to them. They are incredible, and I need to do a video, and at some point I'm going to have to sit down for a couple of weeks and go through the whole lot. If you want to be introduced to Oregon, get this album, because this has got Larry Coryell with Oregon exploring a sort of an acoustic approach to Indian classical music influence in fusion. In other words, what John McLaughlin then went on to do in Shakti. Now, this came out in 1975. The first Shakti album is also recorded in 1975. And what this shows is that Larry Coryell was also exploring those Indian influences as well. And for me, he does it in a completely unique way. This is a masterpiece of an album. One of the most important albums in the history of jazz rock. An essential album. At number 5 above that, I've got a live album called European Impressions, right? This came out, I think around about 1977. I haven't put the date on my list. It's a solo acoustic live performance recorded at Montreux Jazz Festival. This is Larry Coryell walking out with an acoustic guitar and a microphone in an audience and just improvising. He's doing a Keith Jarrett, right? This is a genius album. His approach is completely unlike what you expect. He plays these sort of angular single note lines, and he builds up this sort of incredible heavy jazz rock sound just with the acoustic guitar. It's like putting a tape recorder in Larry Coryell's head and just recording what's coming out. He's an absolute virtuoso. This really shows you what a genius this guy was to be able to pull this off in a way which is completely unique, right? To be able to pull this off in front of an audience is an incredible thing. It's an incredible album, which is why I've rated it above Restful Mind, which I thought would be at the top of the sort of acoustic stuff that he's done. But this is an incredible album. I don't know what else I could say. And you've got to go and check this one out. This was another album I wasn't aware of until I did my research, and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing. His approach is absolutely unique. On some of the 11th House albums, every now and then you'll get a solo guitar piece, and it's this very angular, modern classical influence harmony that's coming out. That's very futuristic, very Mahavishnu actually. Um, he's got a sound in his playing which is more Mahavishnu than Mahavishnu. You know, it's like when John McLaughlin leaves the Mahavishnu orchestra and goes off on his own, we don't hear that harmonic sound anymore, that heavy sound that we associate with tracks like Dancer Maya. Larry Coryell has explored it far more, and it makes me wonder how much he was actually an innovator in that sort of very heavy modern classical atonal approach that the Mahavishnu orchestra sort of made their signature sound. Incredible album. At number 4, I have Level 1, the second album by the 11th House that came out in 1975. This is my favourite 11th House album. They've developed the sound more. It's brilliantly recorded. It's really fiery. Alphonse Mouzon is off the scale. Larry Coryell is off the scale. The reason I've ranked it lower is I've been objective, and what you hear is the influence of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. The opening track on the album sounds like the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and I think in terms of so my phone keeps, I'm putting it on silence. It keeps buzzing every time I do a video. Everybody wants to talk to me. They must know. I think it's my mom. She knows. Anyway, I'll get back on track. Where were we? At level 1. If I was doing my personal list, this would be above the first album introducing 11th House. But historically, and in terms of innovation and individuality, it has to rank a little bit lower. But it has come out at number 4 on this list of 20 albums. It's a monumental jazz rock classic, right? At number 3, above that, I have, and I've missed one out, haven't I? Because I've missed number 7 out, you idiots. Oh. So if you back up to number 7, see, YouTube would just like now edit this so it was in sequence. I might do that. Okay, I'm going to do that. So, no, it's not. It's not right. It's not right. I have to let this thing run as it runs. And those of you who watch this channel, you like it when I go wrong. So I've gone wrong, everybody. I've gone wrong. I missed out number 7. You see, it's my glasses. I can't see properly. You see, the trifocals, I'm looking in this really small writing. I've got, you don't, look at it. Oh, I better not touch it because I'm recording the, oh, it's all going wrong now. I was doing what I got. I thought I got to the last 4 without, I thought I'd been articulate and I thought I'd nailed it, and now it's all bloody gone wrong. Oh my God. Where are we? So at number 7, which is after At Montreux with the 11th House, but before Restful Mind, I've got Larry Coryell at the Village Gate, which was recorded on Vanguard Records in 1971. It's got his wife, Julie Coryell, on vocals on Beyond These Chilling Winds. Julie Coryell was one of the great photographers of the jazz rock era, and she brought a brilliant book out in the 70s, which was sort of interviews with various jazz rock musicians, and it's essential if you want to know about jazz rock. I haven't got a copy anymore, and it's got the great group, which is Mervyn Bronson on bass and Harry Wilkinson on drums. This is a fantastic group. This is basically Larry Coryell's take on the Band of Gypsies. You know, if you want to hear a jazz virtuoso who's got that sort of command of that sort of outside playing and harmonic sophistication, but playing like Jimi Hendrix, this is the album to get. It's incredible. It's well recorded. I think it's one of the great jazz rock albums, and it came out in 1970, I think. Let's just check it. 71. It's recorded in 1970. It shows that Larry Coryell is so ahead of the game and is deserving of his Godfather of jazz rock moniker. Anyway, shall I get back on track and we'll go to number 3 now, which is Introducing the 11th House, one of the greatest jazz rock albums ever made. It came out on Vanguard in 1974. It is made even better because it's got Randy Brecker on trumpet, and Randy Brecker's just playing off the scale. Mike Mandel off the scale. This is a ferocious, fiery album, absolutely brilliant. And so we're down to the last 2. Now, I have been umming and ahhing of these last 2 of which to put to number 1. If in a perfect world, these are both number 1. They are both by his classic early 70s group, which again features Harry Wilkerson on drums, Mervyn Bronson on bass, and Mike Mandel on keyboards, and Steve Marcus on soprano sax and tenor sax on one of them. I don't know which one to go for. I'm going to go for what I've got written down. So at number 2, I have Offering, that came out on Vanguard in 1972. This album is unbelievable, right? It's an essential album to anybody who's into jazz rock. This band just flies. Coming out in 1972, this is the same period as the Mahavishnu Orchestra. And I feel that what we have here is Larry Coryell's unique take on jazz rock fusion before he hears the Mahavishnu and decides to follow them down that road. It's opening a way of playing jazz rock fusion which is completely logical, but what you can't really get on any other album, and seems to pull together all the elements that the early jazz rock bands do. Steve Marcus. Now, let's have a chat about Steve Marcus. Steve Marcus is one of the greatest saxophone players, I think, of the last 50, 60 years. For most of his career, he sat with a regular gig putting up with Buddy Rich's sort of abuse. Although I don't think Buddy would have had a go at Steve Marcus. And that's when I first came across him, was watching Buddy Rich videos as a kid when he would appear on the telly. And this older guy would stand up, with a big, the big hair, Steve Marcus's big hair, and just come out with his incredible saxophone solos, flying, absolutely flying. And the fact that Buddy kept him there is testament to how great he was. But in the late 60s, Steve Marcus was a pioneer. He brought out in 1967, I think, or 68, an album called Tomorrow Never Knows, which is a sort of John Coltrane take on popular songs. It's got Larry Coryell on guitar as well. It's insane, right? It really is one of the greatest early fusion albums. Steve Marcus is like a Coltrane. He just flies, and he flies on these albums. Mike Mandel flies on these albums. Larry Coryell's guitar playing is incredible. He's as fast as John McLaughlin, and technically he's pulling off lines on the guitar that are insane. He's sweeping up and down the neck like Frank Gambale. He's screaming the blues. I mean, let's be serious. John McLaughlin's got a ton of blues, but when John McLaughlin's bending the notes, it's all over the place. That's the John McLaughlin sound. But Larry Coryell can play the blues. He can play country picking. This is incredible. Offering is incredible. And at number 1, I've got Barefoot Boy, that came out in 1971. Now, the reason I put this higher is because what he's innovating here is an earlier example of it. This is the year the Mahavishnu Orchestra came out. Weather Report came out that same year with an album that was totally wrong-footed in terms of jazz rock. Larry Coryell has got a sound here which is equally important for me. This is so important. The same group again. On this album, on side 2, there is a track which I cannot remember. That it's like... Whoa, God, you see, this is what... I'm going to have to look this track up. It's a whole side, right? And it's basically Coltrane on guitar. It really is. I've got no internet in here, so the chances of being able to hook up. And if we can just pull a little bit out of the ether computer, because I've got to tell you the name of this track. Oh, this started off all right. It's always when I've got a long list. A long list's hard, you see. A long list's hard. We're getting there. I'm having to pull up Wikipedia. It's rubbish, isn't it? You could be doing this yourself, couldn't you? Right, it is called A Call to a Higher Consciousness. It's 20 minutes of insane rock guitar pushed through the John Coltrane quartet. It's absolutely incredible. And looking at this, the credits on this, we've also got Roy Haynes on drums, Coltrane's drummer, before they got Elvin Jones in. Um, Both of these albums, Offering and Barefoot Boy, are the best of Larry Coryell. It's not the albums anyone ever mentions. Anybody who knows about Larry Coryell knows that these are the two greatest albums. And so, if you want to start with Larry Coryell, go for those two albums. Get the 11th House, the introducing the 11th House, and also get Restful Mind. I would say those would be the four to start with. Anyway, I've got through the list just about, and I apologise for the rubbish bits in there. But there is a weird fan base that likes to watch me making mistakes, so I won't edit it. I'll keep it all in. That's what I will do. Right. I've got a few other albums that are worth checking out where he played on other people's albums, right? Not that weird Jimmy Pepper album with the Native American weird stuff on. I mean, I know you're gonna. I'm not gonna tell you the title of it because you'll be able to find it out anyway. The albums that I got that you should check out would be Wolfgang Dornier's Etc. Wolfgang Doria is a German keyboardist emerged in the late 60s. He put a short-lived jazz fusion band called Etc. together, and they're off the scale. And in 1972, they made an album called Knirsch. Knirsch. Knirsh. It's like avant-garde music concrete jazz fusion with Larry Coryell on guitar and John Heisman on drums. It's mind-blowing, right? Another incredible album is by Michael Mantler. I am discovering more and more about Michael Mantler. He's one of the great jazz fusion composers. He sounds like nobody else, and his stuff's dark and weird and strange. And he made an album called Movies, and it's got Steve Swallow and Blaze and Carla Bley on keyboards, but it's got Tony Williams on drums and Larry Coryell on guitar. This is a very interesting album. One of the great Larry Coryell moments for me when I was growing up was his guitar solo on Lenny White's album Venusian Summer. And the final track, why can't I remember tracks today? The final on track of there I'm just going to make a title up. It was called something like The Prince of the Sea or something like that. And there's a great big fusion epic right at the end of Venusian Summer where he duels with Aldi Meola, and it's incredible. So that's great. He plays on an album by the great songwriter Jimmy Webb. Jimmy Webb is the guy that wrote one of the greatest songs ever written, Wichita Lineman. And he made an album called And So On in the early 70s and pulled Larry Coryell on guitar. And Larry Coryell is playing functional songwriting guitar. Jimmy Webb's songs are absolutely incredible. Jimmy Webb's singing himself. He's not a great singer, so you have to get around that. But I enjoyed his personal take on his own songs. Listen to this, but it's really interesting to hear Larry Coryell and hear the breadth of what this guy could do. There is an album that another incredible keyboardist played, Larry Young, who was the organ player in Tony Williams' lifetime, and just before he died he brought an album out called Spaceball, which I think was his attempt at commerciality, but it's a work of absolute genius. It features the incredible Ray Gomez on guitar as well as Larry Coryell. You've got to check it out. I'm in discussions with Ray Gomez. He's one of my favourite guitar players. And I didn't know that he'd played on this album. I was aware of it, but I hadn't clocked it. So, I sent a message, and Ray just messaged back saying, Larry was a genius. He was a beautiful man, or something like this. Incredible. So I'm hoping at some point we'll get an interview with Ray Gomez, and we'll be able to explore him working with Stanley Clarke, Michael Walden, and Larry Young, as well as all the other incredible stuff he did. Another guitarist that we really need to delve into. And the last album that you should check out is Fusion 3, which came out, which is by it's Michael Urbaniak, isn't it? Oh, this is rubbish now. I wish I'd mentioned this one. My memory's failing me today. I bet it won't find it now, will it? Yeah, it's Michael Urbaniak. I don't like saying his name. Incredible violin player. He made 3 incredible fusion albums. First one's called Fusion 1, the second one's called Fusion 2, and Fusion 3. It's got some of Steve Gadd's best drumming. And on the track Bloody Krishna, I can remember that title. Larry Coryell does some of the most out there, speedy, McLaughlin-esque, all over the place guitaring. Oh my God. Right, before I finish, there's one more thing I wanted to say. I want to say why I think he hasn't got the credit that he should have. I think, firstly, John McLaughlin came in and stole his thunder with a Mavish Orchestra. Larry Coryell seeing that and not having the best record deal, not having a Columbia behind him like John McLaughlin had, not having an Atlantic Records behind him. Now, John McLaughlin was able to negotiate that deal because he played with Miles Davis, and he was able to use Miles Davis' connections and contacts to negotiate an incredible deal. Weather Report had the same thing. These labels that Larry Coryell on, I don't think could support him and market him in the way something like CBS could. You know, when you got sort of, whoa, I need to kick them off. This is going terrible. I shouted because I'm on this microphone. I bet it distorted then as well. Sometimes when you do these videos, it's all there for you. It just happens. It's all great. Now, I tell you what's going wrong. It's because I have my lovely new mic and I've got my lovely new lights on and it's all crystal clear beautiful and I'm recording. And because I've got all this stuff going on, it's like I can't just talk. Right? It's really difficult when you got all this, and now I've got to take all the audio and I've got to try to match it and put it all together, and I've got like overlays. I'm really trying to get the production values up, but quality could sometimes, it can knock you off. It can stop you from being free and expressive. And now I've got to this point where I've been stumbling through all these mistakes. Now I've got to this point where I've just given up now. Listen, it's all just coming out. This is the way art should be made. You shouldn't get bowed down by quality. You should feel that you're able to step in and just express yourself. And that's another reason I think Larry Coryell does not get the credit, because there's a whole bunch of technique Nazis out there that just want to hear perfect guitar playing. It's the sort of types that like Larry Carlton, you know, and they don't want to hear a mistake. Larry Coryell's not like that. He is willing to push it to the point where he falls over, and he falls over a lot, and I love it. Right, and I've fallen over here too. And maybe that's the big lesson of this video. Sometimes you just got to let it fall over and let it be. And not go through and edit all the bits out and make it look like I'm better than I am. This is it. This is what you get. Same thing with Larry Coryell. And he was an incredible guitar player. But also, we have to say that throughout the 70s, he was developing a terrible drug and alcohol habit. Right, anybody who's seen him crop up in the guitar trio with John McLaughlin and Paco de Lucia, because he was the original guitarist, and I love that group more with Larry than I do with Al Di Meola. Once Al Di Meola came in, it just seems like it's like a lot of Cox, you know, it's all a lot of this, isn't it? Larry Coryell comes in and brings in a sort of an X factor. They did a live video recorded at the Royal Albert Hall, and that was the first time I heard the guitar trio. That is my favourite thing by the guitar trio. And on that video, which I think was recorded in 1979, Larry Coryell walks out wearing his white suit that he was wearing in 1973 with the big white flares. He looks like completely out of place, and he sits down and he's sweaty and he's just not with it. Now, the reason why they dropped Larry Coryell was because of his problems with drugs. It has to be said that he then fell under the sort of beautiful, and I would love to fall under this as well, Herbie Hancock. Herbie Hancock came in and rescued him, and I think he discovered Buddhism, and by the 80s he'd cleared himself up, and cleaned himself up, I think is the better way of saying that. And he does some incredible albums in the 1980s. It's a return really to his jazz guitar roots. But the important albums are here between 1968 and 78. Larry Coryell really is one of the greatest musicians of that period, and he's not got the credit he should. So over this video, I've tried my best to come up with my definitive Larry Coryell video. So those out there that are Googling about Larry Coryell, maybe some will find their way here. And I hope, even though I've stumbled through this, it was all right for the first half, but then it went all wrong. But it's what it is, isn't it? It is what it is, and that's what it is. This is YouTube. It's not Hollywood. This is YouTube. This is what you come to see. It's here today, gone tomorrow, isn't it? That's what YouTube is. Anyway, I hope you appreciate my new mic and my new light. I had a new light, and nobody liked it. When I had it on me, it was reflecting these big white circles in my glasses. So I've now put the lights there behind, lighting up the space, and I feel like I'm in a nice, light, airy space now. And that's the sort of space I want to be in when I'm doing my videos. So I hope you appreciate all the effort I've put in for this one. And also, I'd just like to say, if you want to help me out even more, I got a new jumper as well. Got it from second-hand shops, and I think this is a nice jumper to be talking about jazz rocking. So if you want to help me out, you can put a bit of money in my PayPal tip jar. The link is down below. All right? Or you can become a Patreon. Now, this week, we set up a Discord and a WhatsApp group. And there's a whole ton of people, and they're sharing each other's music. They're listening to music. It's really fantastic. So if you want to come in and join in that and come and join the Andy Edwards Club, it's brilliant. And then I can feel like a king of a kingdom, which I want to. That's very important to me because it gives me self-worth. But if you don't want to do all those things, at least like the video. Come on, just put a like in, even if it's just for the mistakes. Put a like in, and then if you want to subscribe, you can. I will allow you to do it. Go on, subscribe. Anyway, that's the end of the video. Oh, God. What a bloody difficult thing that was. And I was going to put a Larry Coryell album up in the background. The anal retentive watchers of this channel get very upset that my records aren't in order, so I can't find anything. But the one I've just seen, I'll stick it up at the end, is this one here. I've got about half the ones on the list. I've just found. Oh, knack at the end. So I've just found Twin House. Don't know where it came. That's a great album that he made with Philip Catherine. There it is. So shall we put that up at the end like it was supposed to be there? And obscure Robert's face. Bloody Robert Plant. Robert Plant, he hangs over me like a ever-present force. You can hardly see it anyway. My head's in the way. Anyway, I've done everything. What's the time? Let's see what the time is. I've got a student now. Yeah, I've got 10 minutes, so I've got enough time to go into the toilet and do all that stuff. You don't need to know that, do you? I think we're finished. See you on the next one. Bye.